My mom wanted to be the perfect stepmother for her stepson, so she tampered with my food on my birthday to teach me a lesson. But now my stepdad and dad have seen the video, and things are getting messy for her. My mom has never been the kind of woman who gets along well with other women, if you know what I mean. She never hid her disappointment about giving birth to me. She openly admitted to everyone, even in my presence, that she had always wanted a baby boy. The fact that she ended up with a daughter seemed to her like some sort of unfortunate twist of fate. She would tell her friends how she was stuck with me forever, which was incredibly painful to hear. It felt like a rejection of my very existence, a dismissal of who I was simply because of my gender. From an early age, I also noticed a stark difference in how my mom treated me compared to all my cousins. While she would often shower them with praise and affection whenever we saw them, I always received a colder and more critical attitude from her. She would also scold me if I acted too feminine, according to her. She banned me from buying anything pink because she felt it was too girly and insisted I stop acting like other girls. I was also forbidden from wearing skirts or dresses. She dressed me like a boy for a long time and only allowed me to play with toy cars and trucks. I wasn't even allowed to have long hair because she thought it was too difficult to manage, and she always made me cut it very short. Honestly, I never understood her obsession with gender. Why did it matter so much if I was a girl or a boy? Why couldn't she see beyond that and appreciate me for who I was? As a child, these thoughts swirled in my head. I began to question my worth and whether I could ever meet her expectations. As if that wasn't enough, she also had a particular disdain for other women in our lives, which led to constant criticism and gossip about them. If one of my mom's co-workers ever got promoted, she would complain to my dad and me, insinuating that the woman must have slept with someone to get the promotion. That was her default assumption, her immediate explanation for any woman's success in the workplace. The idea that a woman could achieve something through hard work and merit seemed foreign to her. It was as if, in her eyes, women could only advance by compromising their integrity. If one of my classmates received more appreciation from a teacher, my mom would quickly jump to the conclusion that the child's mother must have had an affair with the teacher, and that's why the child was getting extra points. Not only was all of this strange for me to hear as a child, but her negative attitude was a constant presence in my life, shaping much of my childhood and how I saw myself and others. As you can imagine, my mom's comments made it difficult for me to form healthy relationships with other women. Her constant attacks on other women created an atmosphere where I felt it was almost wrong to admire or be close to any woman in my life. She made me believe that women were always competing with each other. If I ever befriended a girl, my mom would constantly remind me that it was better to be friends with boys and that boys were always more helpful. For this reason, for a long time, I only had male friends in school because I was scared to befriend a girl and have her betray me. As if all these things weren't enough, when I was in high school, my dad confessed to my mom that he wanted a divorce. This was quite unexpected because I always thought my parents were fine. However, it turned out that he had been having an affair with one of his coworkers. Devastated and furious, my mom packed our things and took me to live in a motel. What followed next was an ugly divorce battle between the two of them. My mom's anger toward my dad was intense and all-consuming. She constantly used me as a pawn in her battle against him. I became a tool for her to get back at him, to inflict pain and assert her dominance. Every time I expressed a desire to spend time with my dad during their separation, she would get enraged with me. She would scream and yell, accusing me of choosing him over her, the man who had betrayed us. He cheated on us, she would shout. You shouldn't even be in contact with him. The idea that I might want or need a relationship with my dad was incomprehensible to her. In her eyes, maintaining any connection with him was a direct betrayal of her and everything she had been through. Whenever I tried to tell her that I needed both parents and couldn't just cut my dad out of my life, her response was filled with venom. She accused me of trying to stab her in the back, of being disloyal. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're just like all the other women, she would say. I tried my best to understand her perspective, but I missed my dad terribly. He had always been a good father to me, regardless of his relationship with my mom. When my dad and I met, unlike my mom, he never said a word against her. When he found out that my mom had told me about his affair, he immediately apologized and took full responsibility for his actions. He explained that he had been deeply unhappy in his marriage, and that falling in love with his coworker had been unexpected. Despite this, he emphasized several times that cheating on my mom was a grave mistake and assured me that when I grew up, he would be open to answering any questions I might have about what happened. Navigating my parents' divorce as an only child was one of the hardest challenges of my life. It forced me to grow up quickly, but also taught me that my parents, like anyone else, were human and prone to making mistakes. Since the divorce, my dad has remained a constant presence in my life, ensuring he fulfills his responsibilities. He has consistently paid child support to my mom, showing his commitment to providing for me despite their separation. He also allowed my mom and me to continue living in our family home even though he moved out. The condition was that I would live with my mom in the house to ensure stability in my life. He didn't want my mom and me to go through the ordeal of packing up all our things and moving to an entirely new neighborhood. Primarily, I live with my mom but spend every other weekend with my dad. This arrangement allows me to maintain a relationship with both parents. However, I have to admit that since the divorce, my mom has become worse as a parent. She's extremely obsessed with remarrying before my dad does. I think her ego was deeply wounded by the fact that my dad cheated on her. After their separation was finalized, she started going out more frequently to bars and clubs, eager to meet new people and perhaps find a new partner quickly. This led her to meet Dave just 3 months after the divorce. Dave is a DJ and a single father to a son, Matthew. Dave and his ex-wife had Matthew when they were quite young, and after she left them, Dave took full responsibility for raising his son. Matthew is 3 years younger than Joe and seems pretty well behaved. Dave also seems like a good guy. However, the real problem began when I started noticing my mom's behavior around Matthew. As you know, my mom always wanted a son, a dream that never came true for her. So, when Dave and Matthew came into our lives, my mom seemed quite thrilled at the prospect of potentially having Matthew as a son. She constantly went shopping with him, buying him new shoes or shirts, and proudly told all her friends how great Matthew was at school or how proud she was of him. At first, I thought maybe I was just jealous, but it became even clearer that something was wrong when even my dad started noticing the same thing. My mom would constantly call my dad to ask if I could spend more days with him because she wanted to go on road trips with her boyfriend and his son instead of staying home with me. If Dave had a gig somewhere, my mom would tag along. I tried not to worry too much about her change in behavior since I was always happy to spend more time with my dad. One day, things came to a head when my mom returned home from one of her road trips and informed me that she and Dave had gotten engaged. This was unexpected and way too soon, considering they had only been dating for a few months. I wanted to question her but knew that if I said anything negative, she would take it as me not supporting her. So I just stayed quiet and instead told her how happy I was for her. My mom then informed me that she had decided Dave and Matthew would move in with us. I was shocked by this announcement, especially because the house didn't even belong to her in the first place. It was my dad's house, and he had allowed us to continue living there after the divorce. As expected, when Dad found out about her plans, he was furious. He bluntly told her that if she wanted Dave and Matthew to move in, then Dave would have to pay him rent every month. He wasn't going to let someone else live in his house for free. My mom didn't take it well. She argued with Dad, accusing him of being jealous and trying to sabotage her relationship because she was finally happy with someone else. She was convinced his refusal to let Dave move in rent-free was a deliberate attempt to ruin things for her, but Dad stood his ground. He reminded her that the house belonged to him and that he had only allowed her to stay there for my sake. He made it clear that if she thought he was being a pain, then she would also have to start paying rent or move out. The whole situation escalated, but in the end, Dave stepped in and agreed to pay rent to my dad. He and his son then moved into our house. At first, Dave moved into the master bedroom with my mom, while Matthew took over the guest room. Everything seemed to settle into a new routine, and Matthew and I played a lot of video games together. I was happy to finally have a stepbrother, having been an only child for so long, but it didn't take long before Matthew started complaining about the bed in the guest room. His room had an old bed, and understandably, it affected his sleep. Dave promised him they'd buy a new one soon. However, one afternoon, I came home to find that my bed had been moved into Matthew's room, while the bed from the guest room had been placed in mine. I asked my mom why this had happened. She casually brushed it off, saying Matthew deserved a good bed to sleep on and that it wasn't a big deal. I argued with her that Dave could have bought him a bed, just as he had promised. She shrugged and replied that I was older than Matthew, so I should learn to make sacrifices for the sake of their new life. After this incident, it slowly became painfully clear to me that my mom was clearly favoring Matthew over me, treating him with a level of care and attention that wasn't normal. For example, during dinner, he was allowed to take second servings without question, but if I tried to take more, she would slap my hand and harshly tell me not to be a fat cow. The irony was that I wasn't even overweight. I was athletic, active, and had a healthy appetite, but she insisted that Matthew, being a growing boy, deserved the extra food more than I did. Then there was the time my dad told me he had tickets to a baseball game and wanted to take me. I was excited and couldn't wait to go, but when I told my mom, she immediately insisted that I should let Matthew go instead. Her reasoning? because he was a boy and would enjoy it more. Obviously, my dad refused to take Matthew in my place, and I went as originally planned. The game was great, and I was happy to spend that time with my dad. On multiple occasions, my mom would plan day trips with just Dave and Matthew, deliberately excluding me from their plans. If Matthew ever invited me to join, she would insist that it was just the three of them who needed to bond as a family, and that I, being older, should sit this one out. It was as if she was creating a new family that didn't fully include me. The exclusion was painful, making me feel like an outsider in my own home, as if I was being pushed out. When my 18th birthday was approaching this year, my dad informed my mom that he wanted to throw me a big party to celebrate both my milestone birthday and my high school graduation. Since our family home was spacious enough and had a large backyard, he planned to hire a catering service and have everything set up there. My mom wouldn't have to lift a finger since he was handling all the arrangements. However, as expected, my mom tried to oppose it. She argued that hosting such a big event for me was unnecessary and that we could just have a family dinner at a restaurant instead. My dad argued that, being his only daughter, he wanted to celebrate such an important milestone in my life with the rest of our family and friends. Although I agreed with my dad's idea, my mom wasn't willing to let it go so easily. She then argued that throwing such a big celebration for me would be a slap in the face to Dave, as he could never afford to do something similar for Matthew when he eventually graduated. She claimed it was unfair to make Matthew feel excluded by hosting an event that was all about me. She then suggested that maybe we could celebrate Matthew during the party as well. This was supposed to be my special day, a milestone, and yet my mom was more concerned about how it might affect Matthew and Dave. My dad, however, had had enough of her arguments. He firmly reminded her that Matthew wasn't his concern and that this party was for me, his daughter, who deserved to be celebrated. He made it clear that he was going to host this party whether she liked it or not, and if her new family didn't like it, then they were all uninvited. And that was the end of the discussion. This made my mom immediately backtrack on her statements and reluctantly agree to let me celebrate. Then, when it came time to plan the party, my mom continued to interfere with everything. She started dictating how things should be done, saying that since Dave preferred vegan food, we needed to have more vegan options at my party. Now, this was going to be a complete waste of money, since I knew no one else was vegan, but I didn't want to argue with her, so I agreed. Later, since I love eating fish, I wanted to order a fish dish, but my mom informed me that Matthew didn't like fish, so I shouldn't order any fish dishes. I tried to stay calm and firmly told her that this was my party, and I wanted to order the food I liked. If she, Dave, and Matthew had any problems with something I was going to order, then they could abstain just for one night. My response enraged her, and she yelled at me, accusing me of disrespecting her family and calling me a spoiled brat. She continued claiming that my dad's money was going to my head, and that I needed to learn to care about her husband and son too. She shook her head, wagging a finger in my face, and said, "I should teach you a lesson for acting so conceited." She then insisted that if I didn't consider what Dave and Matthew liked while planning the party, she would punish me and take away my phone as a consequence. At that moment, I saw red. I realized I was turning 18 and no longer had anything to lose. I was moving out soon anyway, so I decided to finally let out all the years of pent-up anger. I yelled at her, saying I'd always considered Matthew and Dave's needs, but this was my party, my last celebration before moving out, and I deserved the freedom to make my own decisions. I told her I'd kept my mouth shut for long enough, and that if she took away my phone or punished me without reason, I would call Child Protective Services for mentally and emotionally torturing me all these years. It was obviously a lie, but I wanted her to think twice before mistreating me again. Her eyes widened in shock when she heard me say this. She knew an investigation could impact her relationship with Dave and Matthew, who was still a minor. I then continued to tell her that if she no longer saw me as her daughter, I would cut all contact with her when I went to college. I didn't want a mother who never prioritized me, always put others before me, and made me feel like I was second best in my own home. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered honesty, and I made it clear I was done being pushed aside. She then started insisting I was overreacting, and that all she ever wanted was for me to treat Dave and Matthew as I treated other family members. After this argument, she avoided giving me her opinions on the party as much as she could. When the party arrived, I was excited to celebrate with my family and friends. Dave had offered to DJ the event, and it was great. Meanwhile, my dad was busy chatting with some relatives, proudly boasting about the college I was about to attend. However, the one person who stood out as the odd one out was my mom. She was in the kitchen, sipping her margarita and clearly avoiding mingling with the rest of us. Her disinterest and detachment were palpable, and it was hard not to notice how distant she was from the celebration. Even Dave noticed how aloof she was and went to talk to her, trying to convince her to enjoy the day like the rest of us. When it was time to serve the food, I watched as my mom carefully prepared plates for Dave and Matthew. She seemed to take special care to ensure they had everything they liked. I wanted to let the other guests serve themselves first, so I hung back, waiting for my turn. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my mom came up to me with a plate of food. I looked at her curiously, not knowing what to make of this unexpected gesture. She handed me the plate and wished me a happy birthday. I was baffled and asked her what she was doing, especially since she had never in all the years I could remember served me a plate of food before. She just shrugged and said she wanted to do this for me since I was now 18. It was hard to admit, but in that moment, I felt a warm, comforting sensation in my stomach. Despite everything, there was something comforting about her taking care of me, even if it was just with something as simple as serving me a plate of food. For a brief moment, I felt like she was trying to build a bridge over the gap that had grown between us. However, as soon as I took a bite of the fish on my plate, I had to spit it out. My mouth was overwhelmed by a salty taste, and I started coughing uncontrollably. The guests around me turned to look, and a few of my cousins quickly offered me water, trying to help me calm down. I looked at my plate, confused, and asked if they found the fish too salty. Perplexed, they shook their heads, confused. Growing more suspicious, I checked my plate again and then looked at my mom. Our eyes met, and I noticed she had a smug smile on her face. It took me a moment to realize she was holding an empty salt shaker in her hand, waving it around as if to indicate she had deliberately added too much salt to my fish. Suddenly, I realized she had tampered with my food. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tense. "Did you really put salt on my fish? Why would you do something like this?" She looked at me, still smiling smugly, as if it was all just a mean joke. In a cold tone, she told me she had warned me not to order fish, but I had insisted, so this was her way of teaching me a lesson for being so conceited. She insisted it was just a harmless joke anyway, but that it would teach me never to argue with her in the future. I told her how horrible she was as a mother for even thinking of doing something like that. My mom simply laughed dismissively as she walked away, as if I didn't matter. With cameras installed around the house, I knew I had a way to expose her. After the party, I decided to download the footage from the backyard security camera. The footage clearly showed my mom adding salt to my plate before walking over to me and handing it to me. Even as I write this, the thought of what she did makes my blood boil. I'm planning to share the footage with Dave and Matthew when I move out of the house soon. I wish I could confront her or expose her behavior right now, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut and wait for the right moment, once I'm far away from her. So, am I the bad one if I expose my mom to everyone? Update 1. It's been a month and a half since my last update. I've finally moved out of the house. My dad helped me carry all my boxes to my dorm, and the rest of my things are at his house for now. I still haven't told my dad what happened with my mom because I know he'll be furious, and I'm worried it could lead to a big confrontation. Now that I'm out of the house, I'm ready to go ahead with my plan to expose my mom, as she can't hurt me anymore. I believe Dave and Matthew deserve to know the truth about my mom, even if it may be hard for them. For everyone asking, I'm sure Dave has probably noticed how my mom treats me differently from how she treats his son, but he's never interfered. Anyway, I don't blame him for any of this, and my focus is solely on my mom, who is responsible for everything that's happened. I know he could have said something about it, but he isn't my dad and wasn't responsible for me. That was my mom's job. Update 2. I read everyone's advice, and this morning, I decided to create a group chat with Dave, Matthew, and my dad. I wrote a detailed message explaining how I had been treated differently from Matthew over the years, making sure to emphasize that Matthew wasn't at fault for any of it. Then, I described the incident that happened on my birthday, where my own mom sabotaged my food by adding an entire bottle of salt to it and served it to me out of spite. I told them how I had grown tired of my mother's abusive behavior toward me over the years, and to back up my story, I sent the video as evidence. At the end of my message, I asked Dave if he would ever truly feel comfortable having his son around such a vile woman who had no shame in treating her own daughter this way. This happened just a few minutes ago, and I'm still waiting for them to read and respond. Update 3. Now that I've received some responses, I can provide an update. I was waiting for both Dave and my dad to reply so I wouldn't have to post separate updates. First, my dad called to confirm if everything I said was true and asked why I had never shared all this in detail with him before. I broke down and explained that I sometimes struggle to open up. He apologized to me repeatedly and then told me he had spent the morning yelling at my mother. He also mentioned that he's giving her a 1-month notice to move out. He said he had been considering it for a while but was hesitant. However, now that he knows how she's been treating me all these years, he has no sympathy left for her and wants to reclaim his home. Later, Dave also reached out and told me he had no idea my mother hated me this much. He always thought it was just typical mother-daughter issues, so he stayed out of it over the years. But after seeing the video, he really understood how disturbed she was. When he confronted my mother about it, she, as usual, started blaming me for everything. This led to a big fight between them, and he decided to take some distance from her. He even told me that he's postponing their wedding, which was supposed to happen this year, although it's been delayed multiple times already. Matthew and I also talked, and we're okay. As for my mother, she hasn't stopped calling and messaging me. Her messages range from insults to threats for exposing her, but I no longer care. I've decided to completely ignore her and avoid any interaction with her for now. In the end, I don't regret exposing my mother, and I hope she learns never to mess with me again. Update 4. It's been several months since my last update, and I feel like I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Although not everything is perfect, I can confidently say my life has improved significantly. To start, Dave has finally decided to leave my mother. A few weeks ago, he called and asked if we could meet to talk. I was a little nervous but agreed. We met at a coffee shop near my university, and it was a conversation I'll never forget. Dave began by apologizing profusely. He said he felt terribly guilty for not stepping in sooner and for not noticing the severity of the situation. He explained that he had always felt like something was off with my mother, but could never pinpoint exactly what it was. You know, he said, your mom and I got engaged a long time ago, but there was always something holding me back from taking the next step. Now I understand it was her personality that made me hesitate, he continued. Your mom always acted differently when she was with me. She seemed loving, understanding, and supposedly concerned about you. She constantly told me you couldn't spend time with us because you were with your dad, but deep down she wished we could be a united family. There was always something that didn't sit right with me, Dave said. I wanted to talk to you about it, but at the same time, I didn't want to meddle in the relationship between a mother and her daughter. Now I realize I should have. And I'm so sorry for not helping you all this time. I told Dave I appreciated his honesty and understood his position. It wasn't easy for him to step into such a complicated family dynamic. Dave told me that after seeing the video and hearing my side of the story, he had a long conversation with my mother. As expected, she tried to justify her actions and blamed me for misinterpreting things. But this time, Dave didn't fall for her manipulations. I told her there's no way to misinterpret what I saw in that video, he explained. The way she treated you, how she sabotaged your food on your own birthday, that's not maternal love, it's pure cruelty. He said my mother tried to downplay the incident, claiming it was just a harmless joke and that I was overreacting. But Dave stood firm. I told her that if she was capable of doing something like that to her own daughter, how could I be sure she wouldn't do the same to Matthew in the future? That was the final straw, Dave said. I realized I couldn't build a life with someone capable of being so cruel to her own child. What kind of example would that set for Matthew? Dave informed me that he had decided to end his relationship with my mother for good. Not only did he cancel the wedding, but he also told her he didn't want anything more to do with her. He assured me that this decision wouldn't affect my relationship with Matthew and that I'd always be welcome in his life if I wanted to be. On the other hand, my dad has been incredibly supportive throughout this whole process. After finding out everything that had happened, he took immediate action. As I mentioned before, he gave my mother a month to move out of the house and followed through on his word. My dad explained to me that the house had always been his because he owned it before marrying my mother. After the divorce, he had allowed her to continue living there, mainly for my sake, so I would have a stable and comfortable place to live. He also admitted that part of the decision stemmed from guilt over his infidelity, which was the initial cause of the divorce. But now, my dad told me, there's no reason for her to stay there anymore, and after how she's treated you, I can't let her continue living in my property. My mother tried to fight this decision, arguing that she had the right to stay in the house after so many years of marriage. She even threatened to take the matter to court. However, my dad had consulted his lawyer and had all the documents in order to prove the house was exclusively his. Finally, a few months ago, my mother moved out. I don't know exactly where she went, and frankly, I don't really care. What I do know is that she's no longer in the place I once considered my home, and that brings me a peace I can't put into words. As for my relationship with my mother, I'm sure she's not happy about all of this. But since she's blocked, it's not like she can call me to say anything. Regarding Matthew, after everything that happened, we had a long talk. I explained to him that I never blamed him for the preferential treatment he received from my mother, and that I understood he had no control over the situation. Matthew confessed that he sometimes felt uncomfortable with how my mother treated me, but didn't know how to address the issue. As for my dad, our relationship has grown even stronger. He has apologized countless times for not noticing sooner what was happening, and is making a conscious effort to be more present in my life. We talk on the phone almost every day, and he visits me at campus at least once a month. It feels good to leave my mother and her toxicity behind. And before anyone says it, I'd say the same thing about toxicity directed toward a man. People are good or bad regardless of their gender. What's not okay is generalizing because of one negative experience with someone.